Welcome back to Homer Bound, a podcast where a couple nerds read through and discuss Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. We are still in the Iliad. We're using the Robert Fagles translation, and today we are going to be going through books 5 and 6. I'm Wriste.
I'm Llama.
Wonderful. Now everyone knows who we are, and as always, I want to encourage people to stick around until the end and listen to the end after we've passed it off to our resident expert, Dr. Daniel. I really love listening to the things that he has to say at the end of our episodes. He's very timely about them. He always gets he's always gotten them in so far before we record each episode, and we were recording at a pretty brisk pace. So I'm both grateful and extremely.
I love it because every time I listen to his bits, it helps inform what we're going to talk about today to an extent. Obviously, it's not going to change completely, but it definitely gives us things to think about in the interim time, between recording episodes. I think it's been really awesome, and I just absolutely love his input on these questions, that we have, or just generally things about these books of the Iliad that we've been going through so far. It's been pretty awesome.
That being said, I will, for myself anyway, I will absolutely try to curb my shouting into the Dr. Daniel-filled void, my random questions, like, oh, what's this wine thing? Which I'm sure he's fine to talk about, but unlike the unfortunate mortals of the Iliad, I don't want Dr. Daniel questioning his own agency in this podcast.
No, but I don't
choose whatever he wants to talk about.
I don't think he has any problem with us, having certain questions for him. But I think we can let him pick up on certain things we say. I know that he's picked up on a few things that either you or I have kind of gotten into and given some great insight into it. So I'm always excited to hear kind of what he feels organically about what we're saying.
Yeah, absolutely. So don't skip that part. Always listen to it. It's a great little resource to cap off the episode and to go into the next episode.
Absolutely.
And just as well, I think I forgot to mention this last episode, but if you didn't know, or if you're just tuning in at this episode for some reason, content warning, we are immature adults who like our swearing, and we're also talking about the Iliad, which is filled with a whole bunch of wonderful, terrible, grisly subjects, which will...
Blood, gore, some hugging and kissing.
We'll be as classy about them as we can, but we're also idiots, so,
Speak for
who knows what'll come out of our mouths.
Speak for yourself. No, I'm kidding. I am absolutely an idiot.
You've definitely called yourself a degenerate
Not only have I called myself a degenerate and idiot, but I've called myself many more things, and I own them all.
Likewise. I think that's all the housekeeping we have. I guess the last thing that I'll say is that this is for me anyway, this is a very special episode because it has a couple of my favorite books, book 5 and book 6. They're both really, really cool. There are a lot of firsts in them that hopefully we'll get to discuss in some depth. And it also just has some of my, favorite character moments in the Iliad, I guess, barring what you'd expect from like Achilles or whatever. Yeah. So we're going to be spending a little bit more time on these. We're going to go a little bit longer than we usually do, so the runtime will stretch maybe 20-30 minutes longer, and I'm okay with that.
It's going to be worth it because the material in these books is absolutely compelling. They are some action-packed books, as we'll get into, and there's just so much to go through that it's worth spending a little more time on it, I think.
Yeah. So with that, Llama, why don't you give us the recap this time?
I would be
of our
glad
previous
to.
Episode.
Previously on the Iliad. No, sorry. So before we talked about books 3 and 4 in the last episode, and these were some fun books. Book 3, Helen Reviews the Champions. We get to see a little display of some brotherly love or perhaps hate between Hector and Paris. We get to meet Helen for one of the only times in the book. And actually, this is not the only time.
I was wrong.
He was wrong. But she doesn't make much more of an appearance in the Iliad. And this is one of the few kind of in-depth times we get to meet Helen. Who then reviews some of our champions, Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, Ajax, not Diomedes, as we'll get to in this episode. And then in Book 4, The Truce Erupts in War, we also get to see some interaction between Zeus and Hera, a little bit of old couple bickering, as I liked to put it last time. And then we get basically what amounts to the breaking of this truce that has held until this time. The truce is broken. We have our lovely little Monty Python moment of "I'm not dead yet," where Menelaus is injured, but not as mortally as Agamemnon fears.
It's a flesh
and wound. The armies come together in battle for the first time, and that is where that book leaves us. Going into Book 5, Diomedes fights the gods.
Yeah. Also, the notes that I have given you for this, or that I put together for that episode was slightly wrong. And it makes sense because Helen doesn't point out Menelaus. I guess it would be kind of awkward for her to be like, "Hey, and that's my ex-husband," and she'd want to, like, kind of gloss over that. So, like, I think I mentioned last time that it was curious to me that Diomedes didn't get a place in this evaluation or this review, but it makes a lot of sense for Menelaus to escape this, because I don't think she'd be terribly interested in pointing him out, because she, it probably brings back some sad memories that she's already grappling with.
Yeah, and they kind of go through already how she's kind of almost pining for that previous life that she had.
And as you also mentioned, my statement last episode is partially wrong. We do see Helen again. We'll see her again in Book 6 for a very brief scene. But the spirit of what I was saying is absolutely still true. Helen only stars in one book. Yeah. I feel like Book 6 is the last book we actually see her, but who knows? Maybe my memory has failed me again. And
we shall see.
We'll see if that comes up. But yeah, enough about the previous books. Let's go to what to me is probably the most memorable of the sort of battle-heavy books. And we got a little bit of a taste of what the fighting looks like in the Iliad at the end of Book 4. It was a couple pages where we saw a variety of individuals, many of whom were named, and whose backgrounds and mannerisms or whatever were described, fighting and usually dying by a spear or an arrow or something like that. And there's a lot of that going on in this book. And
a whole lot.
This is where the Iliad gets a little bit muddy for me, because for the previous books, I think we've had a lot of very, like, high concept, easy to digest things that we can grapple onto, like Paris dueling Menelaus, or the truce being broken. There's a lot of that in Book 5 as well, but I feel like a lot of it is more in the details, as opposed to, because you could basically summarize it as, Diomedes fights the gods.
Absolutely.
And there's also other fighting happening.
I know for me, Books 5 and 6 are a couple of books where I kind of had to keep going back and rereading portions of it, because there's so much material packed into these books. Like, they're very dense and they're very detail oriented, and there's just so much going on that I found myself flipping back and forth and like, where was that referenced before? I know I just saw that. And just kind of finding little tidbits here and there that like I had missed on my first reading of it.
And also, like, you'd think that with the, I guess, the description that I gave, where it's just, a bunch of people clashing and soldiers who are named and then described and then die, would be like a little boring. And it still sort of exists in that state in my mind, where, as I said, they sort of smear a little bit more together because there isn't as much of that high concept stuff that you can latch onto. But it, like, whenever I read it, it never bores me. The action is always interesting, and there's still drama happening on the battlefield. And as long as you're looking out for it, you can find it and still have a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, I think in a way I kind of liken it to like a big battle scene in a movie where there's so much going on that you really can't see exactly what it is. But then if you've watched the movie a few times, you start seeing, oh, okay, this is the part where he does this and the other guy over here is doing this. And you become able to pick parts of it out a lot more easily.
And honestly, the fact that it's so segmented, that every encounter is so magnified by the way it's told, it doesn't have really a chance to smear together, because every encounter is a tiny little drama or story in and of itself. There's like a kernel of tragedy when you read that like someone has left their loving parents behind to go fight in this glorious war, but they'll never come back and they die, or what have you, or like they're fighting to impress Hector, and he promised them some great reward, but they'll never get it because they're dead now.
Yeah.
Most of their stories end that way. And it magnifies it. It doesn't smear together when you read it. It's very segmented.
And I think it also just drives the emotional impact of each death home that much more. And I honestly think that's kind of what it's meant to do. You're not meant to just
I think so.
Think of these people dying in a passing way. It personalizes it for you and makes it so that you feel some kind of impact of all these people dying. And in this great war, each and every death is recounted as if it were the most important thing in the room at that moment.
Yeah, it would be very easy for the poet to say, like, oh, and Odysseus killed 5 men or whatever, but instead it goes through, like, even if it doesn't give them a full backstory, at least gives them their names. Like, these were people, and yeah, we'll keep an eye out for those parts. As I said, the really interesting stuff is in the details. We haven't even started on the book. This is just like,
I know.
I guess how these, and this is like sort of the first. Yeah, this is sort of the first that I was talking about, where this is our first big battle book. Some nice alliteration there from me. Good job.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I'm sure everyone's clapping at home as well. But the book starts with, I guess, a couple primary characters in this book, Athena and Diomedes. Athena gives Diomedes strength and courage. She blesses him with power and what have you, and gods seem to do this fairly regularly. She doesn't like go up to him and whack him with a stick or whatever like Poseidon does to some soldiers a little bit later. It just, I guess, she waves her hands and it happens. But she also leads Ares off the field, who is another player in this little drama, this war drama of a book. It's kind of weird, actually, that Ares, the god, or a god of war, I suppose. I think that Athena and Ares are both gods of war.
Yeah, but when you say the god of war, Ares is the one who is going to come to mind.
People usually think of Ares, yeah. But she persuades him to leave the battlefield by saying, hey, leave this fighting to the mortals. And he's just sort of convinced by that.
Well, I think the more convincing part of it for him, and I could be ascribing value here where it isn't, but she also says, let's let Zeus take care of this. Because this is really his show. And we'll sit back and we'll avoid pissing off Zeus.
Yeah. I don't think that we've gotten to the part, maybe we have, but to my memory, I don't think we've come to the part where Zeus actively says, all right, no Olympians are allowed to fight in this
No,
war.
we haven't gotten to that quite yet.
Okay, all right.
But
so this is still sort of up in the air.
Kind of saying, let's both take a step back, because we know who runs the show around here.
Yeah. But she's also playing both sides because she's empowering Diomedes.
Absolutely.
So
she is lying.
She's not so much lying as she is
or
not telling the entire truth to Ares.
Embellishing, or almost kind of like a lie by omission in a way.
Yeah, she's not fighting. Diomedes is.
Right.
And he's doing so with her blessing. She loves Diomedes, it seems. I don't know why, which is not to say that. I'm saying that she shouldn't love him. But yeah, we know why Athena loves Odysseus, right? They're so similar in the way they operate. But Diomedes, I don't know, maybe there's... I guess I haven't thought about Diomedes in that way, because, like Aphrodite loves pretty people because she's pretty, and she likes them, and Athena loves like cunning folks, and maybe Diomedes is more cunning than we thought. I don't know.
It's
I
interesting
because thought about that
because,
until just now.
as we've talked about before, like we don't really get the same introduction to Diomedes as we do the rest of them, and part of that I think is because he takes such a big part in this book. But without that introduction, we don't really have an idea of why Athena likes him.
Yeah. I can give one thing that speaks in favor of the cunning or guile or the careful spokenness of Diomedes, but that'll come a little bit later. We'll move past that. As I said, Athena gives him power. She leads Ares off the field. We'll all come back to this later. But we also get another recurring character from book 4, Pandarus. Poor guy. This is
this poor sap.
Yeah, and I think we were talking earlier about how I said he's unlucky. You used a different word. I can't remember what word you used. It was something like, I don't know, cursed. Like the gods were actively. It seems like the gods are against him.
What it's okay, and this is not something I've said before, but this is the mental image I have. Charlie Brown, where he's like running to kick the football, and Lucy is always pulling it away from him. That's what this feels
Athena's
like.
Lucy.
Athena is Lucy, and poor Pandarus keeps having this football tugged away from him at every, moment that he feels like he's about to kick that football way down the field.
So true.
No, is that not like a beautiful
that's so
mental...
accurate.
Yeah, exactly.
To what's going on. Athena is yoinking, which should be like a victory that he can easily gain because he appears to be he seems like he's a good archer, right?
Yeah.
Like he should be able, and he hits his targets, but he doesn't get what he deserves with those hits. He hits 3 targets, and all of them hit and miss at the same time. And this next appearance that we see him is this second time. The first time that he hit and missed was in book 4 when he shot at Menelaus, and this time again he hits Diomedes. Yeah, I think it's in the shoulder, but it's not a real wound. It's painful, but it's not going to bring him down.
It's just a flesh wound.
Another flesh wound. Diomedes also has his buddy Sthenelus with him. A bunch of different people have these sorts of folks with them. I don't know what they're called. Diomedes says Sthenelus.
They're called sidekicks because
called sidekicks.
For all intents and purposes, is that not kind of what they are?
I guess so. Sthenelus shows a lot of personality. Like the first time I think we see him with Diomedes, this is when Agamemnon is going around and rousing his captains. Sthenelus is very quick to speak up.
Yeah.
And so we get...
And I will say, I don't mean sidekicks necessarily in the way that, you only really see them and they never really talk. I don't think I mean it in that way at all. I just mean, there seem to be these pairings of people who are, always kind of together. Achilles and Patroclus roll together. They are a pairing. There's a lot of these pairings that you'll kind of always see these people hanging out with each other specifically.
Yeah, Idomeneus and Meriones are another pair, the Cretan duo. I'm trying to think of anyone else off the top of my head. I'm sure there are others.
We'll be seeing more, but off of the top of my head is is a terrible thing for me to try because the top of my head.
I feel like more of the Ajaxes have this kind of relationship.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, and we've talked about this before, that I feel like little Ajax is almost always referred to in reference to big Ajax, to giant Ajax. And I just feel bad for him. I feel bad for little Ajax.
Yeah, giant, great Ajax is definitely referred to more, if anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Which is in line with this sort of sidekick role that different people, like their importance is tied to someone else. Sthenelus to Diomedes, Bryones to Idomeneus, etc., etc. I don't know. That's a thing that I've come across, and I don't know what it is. Regardless, Sthenelus yanks the arrow out of Diomedes, and this is when Diomedes prays again to Athena. Oh, actually, I won't say again because I don't know if he's prayed to her before.
I would say it's probably safe to assume that he has prayed to her before in general. Perhaps not that we've seen, but this seems to be something that he's done before.
He explicitly asks for the ability to, I believe, to strike down the person who has wounded him. And Pandarus, when he hits him, he's very eager about it, if I remember correctly. He
brags about it. He brags. He's like, I totally got that guy. Look at that. That was amazing. And everyone's like, well, not so quick.
Or rather, Diomedes flesh wounds him, as you sort of acted out earlier. He's like, this is just a flesh wound, kind of like how Menelaus does with his brother. Although it's a less humorous reveal and more of a like, oh shit, like Diomedes now knows you're here. He prays to Athena. He asks for the ability to strike the person who gets him, and this is where she lifts the mist from his eyes.
Yep, and this is, I think, kind of the turning. I guess maybe not a turning point in the chapter, but this is the part where Diomedes absolutely kirks out and goes on a rampage.
Now, of course, I know everything about what kirking out means because I'm quite familiar with the source material. But for those who don't know, what does kirking out mean?
If I recall correctly, isn't it in reference to like Captain Kirk?
Well, sure, yeah, it must.
Absolutely wild. If you guys have never seen the original series of Star Trek, you should watch it.
I have not.
First of all, you should watch it. You should watch it, Wriste.
I've seen some episodes. They're very goofy.
They're wonderfully goofy. I happen to love the original series, but William Shatner as James Kirk has a tendency to just go absolutely buck wild and be fighting, like several guys off at once, and is an incredibly adept fighter. And so the kind of phrase kirking out came about as to say that, someone is experiencing a Captain
rise
Kirk,
in power level.
A Captain Kirk like eruption of absolute badassery.
Yeah, although Diomedes already has like the strength and courage from earlier. Specifically, when she lifts the mist from his eyes, he is able to see the gods. This is how we cash in on the title of the book, Diomedes Fights the Gods, because he can now actually see them, and they're there. Athena gives one interesting stipulation to Diomedes, which is to only attack Aphrodite. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Did anything about that stand out to you when she said, only go for Aphrodite, don't go for anyone else?
Well, there seems to be this kind of grudge match between Aphrodite and Athena. And there seems to be a grudge there that, and I think this comes from the Judgment of Paris, doesn't it?
Yeah, which Grad summarized, I believe, in his last segment in the last episode.
Yeah, and so the origin of, the Trojan War basically comes from this Judgment of Paris, in which Grad describes it way better than I can. So I'm going to tell you guys to just listen to that. Listen to Grad describe the Judgment of Paris. It's amazing. But
really, really, really quickly, it's basically Paris has to judge a beauty contest, and he picks Aphrodite, and it pisses off the other two contestants, which were Athena and Hera.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this enmity between the two of them And it seems like here Athena kind of chooses to exercise her, like, pettiness in a way and just say to Diomedes, like, get her, get the pretty one, since she's so pretty.
The thing is, before I guess I'd always known about the judgment of Paris. I knew that, you know, there was this beauty contest with this golden apple or whatever, and that was how Paris, I guess, won Helen. But I never made that connection with why different gods are on, or at least why these gods are on certain sides.
Yeah, I didn't know about this. This was new information to me. And
I failed to make that connection.
It's a really interesting connection, I think, and it, you know, has a lot of consequences throughout the Iliad.
Yeah, well, we'll have to keep a lookout for that, I guess. I can't think of any others off the top of my head, but I'm sure they'll spring up. But before I knew about the judgment of Paris, I thought that it was sort of a, hey, Diomedes, you can see the gods, but don't fight any of the dangerous ones, right? Like Aphrodite, as we'll learn as the book goes on, is not a warrior. She is very easily wounded, and she doesn't really fight that much, and so I guess it would be safe for Diomedes to go after her. But you know, like the other gods, like Apollo's he has his golden sword or whatever, and his arrows, and Ares, you know, Ares is a monster, so we want to steer clear of him. And that was what I thought it meant originally. But now that I have this context, as you said, it seems like a sort of petty move. Like this is Athena putting a rat inside Aphrodite's pillowcase or something.
Absolutely.
It also, if this is true, it serves as a fun little contrast in terms of the dramatic stakes involved. On the battlefield, these mortals are fighting for their lives, you know, very fiercely, very brutally. And as I said before, war is not, you know, painted terribly beautifully or as much fun, even though some characters say it is. But for Athena, this is like she's pranking Aphrodite. Like that's the extent of the stakes for her. This is a jab. But in doing so, she's giving Diomedes power for sure, but she's also bringing him face to face with these gods, which I can only imagine is quite dangerous.
I would be terrified.
Diomedes gets a little bit terrified too, which happens a little bit later. But yeah, so we have this. So Diomedes now has superpowers. He can see the Matrix, and he, as you said, he kirks out. He kills a bunch of dudes for a few.
Matrix. Sorry,
say what?
That he can see the Matrix. Just tickled something within me.
Yeah, he puts on sunglasses and he can.
It's
like,
a
dodge
great
arrows
description, though. It is a really good description of, like, you know, like he gets these powers that, like, nothing is going to hit him. Everything is within his sight. He's, like, absolutely tuned in.
Yeah, and it describes it as lifting the mist from his eye. Like, I mean, I don't imagine that any person would describe themselves as having mist over their eyes. I don't imagine they would know this. I mean, I imagine that they know that, you know, the gods are around, but know that this is, yeah, like something that has to be cleared, and that they can, oh, now I can see reality or what have you.
Yeah. Or you just see a clearer version of, you know, what's going on in front of you.
But regardless of what he sees or doesn't see, he kills a bunch of dudes. Diomedes kills a bunch of dudes just to show how strong and cool he is. And I think this is the first time, this is around, you know, a fifth of the way through the book, when Aeneas looks to team up with Pandarus to take down Diomedes. I believe that Aeneas notices that Diomedes is, as you said, running buck wild. And Aeneas is like a reverse spoiler character, where something written so much longer after the Iliad, like he stars in what's called the Aeneid, right? Where he survives Troy and founds Rome or something like that. I've never read it.
I've definitely not read it.
Okay, fair enough. In the movie Troy, when Paris hands the sword to that random kid,
that's right.
Aeneas, that's him, because he's supposed to survive Troy and found Rome, or something like that. And this was like a specially commissioned poem or something like that. But we know that, but because we are aware of this thing that's been written so much, even so much longer ago, he survives. So Aeneas seeks to team up with Pandarus, and Pandarus sort of bemoans his luck. He sees what we see in that he's so close and yet so far to glory, and it hurts.
Yeah, he is just that football sitting there. He can see it. He wants to kick it. It will get yoinked.
Well, he kicks it, but what happens is almost like it flies up into the air and spirals, and it lands exactly where he had kicked it originally. So he's made no progress despite him affecting the world, which is arguably more frustrating.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's a good way of putting it.
His missiles have found his mark.
They have, just not enough. Not enough to kill his mark. Certainly not enough for him to get the glory that he seeks, which he does seek it. He wants that glory. You can feel it when he talks. He's so enthusiastic, and it actually hurts me to read passages with him in it, because you just have so much hope for this, this archer who is about to get yeeted off the face of the earth. Sorry, spoilers.
Yeah. As you've probably guessed by now, his bad luck comes to an end because he dies. Yeah, I want to read a little bit of what he says, just because it's so dramatic. For me, this is line. It starts at line 233, where he says, "What bad luck to snatch this curved bow off its peg that day. I marched my Trojans hard to your lovely town of Troy to please Prince Hector." He's talking to Aeneas. "But if I get home again and set my eyes on my native land, my wife, and my fine house with the high vaulting roof, let some stranger cut my head off then and there if I don't smash this bow and fling it in the fire. The gear I packed is worthless as the wind." And I feel like if I remember correctly, this bow was given to him by Apollo or something. I could be wrong.
I don't remember that, but I also don't remember a lot of things.
Regardless of whether his bow is special or not, this is sort of what I'm talking about, where we get these little stories. We follow these characters through relatively simple arcs, which it's barely even an arc, I guess. Pandarus wants to. He wants to shoot people, but he can't because the gods won't let him.
Yeah. And it kind of brings me to something that I noticed for myself while I was reading these battle chapters where lots of people are dying and we have these little stories. Whenever they started talking about someone's family or anything related to their house, I was just like, oh, they're about to die.
Yes.
You get to the point where you can kind of see it coming. And then it pulled me in more, as opposed to wanting to kind of glance over it because oh, okay, they're gonna die, whatever. It pulled me in because then that story has a purpose.
Yeah, they're very engaging, as you just said, and the context I think makes it more interesting because at least as modern readers, again, we're not used to that sort of thing. I don't know how this lands for a more time appropriate audience for the Iliad, but for me, at least, it's kind of refreshing and super unique. And we talked about the things that we can sort of trace back to these poems, but this is something that appears to have been lost or washed out because of how mediums work. I don't know how you do that in a television show or a movie.
Yeah, to do that in a TV or a movie, you'd have to have a flashback every time someone's about to die, which just pulls you out of the action and makes it kind of impossible to watch a scene like that. But in this medium, in books too. But I feel there are books that I have read, and I can't think of any specific examples, but I do feel like there are books that I've read that have this kind of way of tying back to someone's background at pivotal, emotional or action-filled moments. So I don't think it's completely lost, but I think that's fair. I think this really direct kind of encapsulated story that we get
on this scale,
absolutely, is something that has definitely, I can't think of a book where I've seen something to this scale, to this degree.
Yeah,
And,
and you're a Lord of the Rings nerd, right? I
am
don't even think Lord of the
big
Rings
Lord of
has that level of detail.
No,
well,
it
maybe
gets
it
close.
does.
And if you read the Silmarillion ever,
I have not read the Silmarillion.
Yeah, it gets into even further detail, but that's another conversation for another day.
I guess moving on with the story, since we've given Pandrus his time in the spotlight, and we know that he's going to die. And honestly, I don't even really consider it a spoiler, because a lot of people are going to die, and you even tend to know who's going to die well before it happens. And Zeus, I don't think we've gotten to any of these parts yet, but Zeus also likes to summarize the plot of the Iliad before it happens.
Yeah, and
a couple times.
In some ways, Zeus is almost kind of like another narrator of the poem.
Yeah, well, he's bringing the prophecies
to fruition.
To bear. And I don't know what the prophecy is around Pandrus. I actually don't even know if the gods give him much of a thought at all. But Pandrus eventually comes around to Aeneas. Aeneas is like, oh, there's Diomedes. We should stop him. Let's get on this chariot and try to kill him. And Pandrus chooses to go, and he takes up a spear this time. And Diomedes sort of sees them coming toward him, and it's a 2-against-1 scenario, I guess, which is also weird because Sthenelus is there with him.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, it is 2 versus 1, but there's a little bird flies in to tell Diomedes, and that little bird is Sthenelus, that these 2 guys are coming your way, and they're gonna try and kill you. Just FYI. And yes. Diomedes is just like, I am going all in. I am going to kill this guy so hard. And he does exactly that.
Cowardice is not in his nature. I think he like climbs out of his chariot. He tells Sthenelus, all right, when I kill them, make sure to take the team, the horses. He's that confident.
Yeah, no, take their stuff after I've killed them, because it will happen.
Yeah. Get their shit. And what ends up happening is, as you said, Diomedes gets it. And there's this third time where Pandrus again hits his target, but also misses. He throws his spear, he hits Diomedes' shield, it punches through, and he's like, yes, I got him. But it doesn't get him. And then Diomedes throws his spear at him, and it just destroys his face.
It's not that he just says, like, oh, I got him. He says it to him. Directly. You're hit clean through the side. You won't last long, I'd say. Now the glory is mine. And Diomedes is like, so about that, no, you didn't hit me. And also, bye-bye. And he hurls a spear directly into his face. And the description that follows is one of my favorite parts of this book, because it describes in great detail exactly the parts. I mean, if you don't mind me reading a little bit.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so with that he hurled, and Athena drove the shaft, and it split the archer's nose between the eyes. It cracked his glistening teeth. The tough bronze cut off his tongue at the roots, smashed his jaw, and the point came ripping out beneath his chin. He pitched from his car, armor clanged against him, a glimmering blaze of metal dazzling round his back. The purebreds reared aside, hoofs pawing the air, and his life and power slipped away on the wind. Like, that is badass.
It's a rough death.
It's gruesome,
it's
but like I can just imagine him like hurling this spear with such a great force that it basically like explodes this guy's head.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep harping on the performative element of this because I'm sure that folks who are listening get it, but I like just imagine how much more interesting or fun this would be to just see someone perform it and mime what they're talking about. I don't know if the poets did that, but I think that'd be pretty cool.
I can only imagine that they did.
There's also a very interesting line. I think it's line 310, where Pandrus says, let's see if he basically says, let's see to Diomedes, let's see if this spear can kill you, after saying like, oh, you've survived my arrows or something. And this is not the only time we see language like that. In fact, we'll hear it from Hector toward the end of the story, where it's an interesting thing to say. To say, let's see if you're actually made of flesh and bone, is basically what it amounts to. Like, let's see if a spear can bring you down. Where it's almost like they're they're trying to reassure themselves that they're up against something that can be killed in battle.
Yeah,
and this will happen a few
I feel
times.
like it's almost kind of an illusion that they know that the gods are interfering here. This is kind of my take on it. I don't know if I'm correct about that or not. I could be off here. But it kind of almost seems to... And the way that you said that just now, like, you know, let's see if this can kill you. Let's see if you're flesh and blood. Makes me think of, like, let's see if someone is protecting you or not. Like, will this actually kill you? Or is someone also, like, holding their hand on the scale here?
Yeah, and I think Pandarus actually says this when he's having his exchange with Aeneas, where he says, you know, like, Diomedes must have a god fighting beside him.
Yeah, actually, you're right about
or something like that. And a lot of people make this assertion about, you know, one person or another sometimes. But yeah, that's just a little passage that I like and that I see repeated, where a warrior kind of has to, like, it's almost like hug a little blankie and say, like, oh, like, at the very least, like, sharp bronze can kill them or something. right? Like this monster is cutting through people like butter, and they must be able to die. Sort of a interesting assertion that seems to be like the person trying to write reality, write with an R. But yeah, Pandarus does not succeed. His spear does not pierce Diomedes. Diomedes gets him, as you read. And this is where Diomedes fights his first god. He sees Aphrodite. Diomedes goes for Aeneas. And Aphrodite realizes that Aeneas is in terrible danger. I think Aeneas is her son. And she goes to, like, lift him up and do that ambiguous teleportation weird thing that I think we talked about in the last episode.
Yep.
Where people just, like, picked up and dropped somewhere else. And she's in the process of doing this, which I guess is a physical action, because when Diomedes stabs Aphrodite, because he can see her, she drops Aeneas. She is unable to finish the job. Apollo finishes the job for her, where he lifts her up, or he lifts Aeneas and takes him. Can't remember where he takes him, to some field or something like that, I think.
And then this is also a part of this book that I really love. The fate of Aphrodite as she is injured and returns, you know, to her mommy. She goes to her mommy.
Yeah. One thing before we get to that, one thing that I guess I'm curious about is, what are Diomedes' intentions when he sees Aphrodite? Like, a wound to the wrist feels very specific, right? Like, if you're trying to kill someone, you'd usually go for their head or their chest or something.
There's a line here that is of great interest to me, because I think it might explain part of that.
Yeah, go for it. Which is
Diomedes, but he, with his ruthless bronze, was hunting Aphrodite. Diomedes, knowing her for the coward goddess that she is. That stuck out to me. And next to it, I wrote JFC, like, Jesus fucking Christ. Because, like, there are some savage insults in the Iliad. This is one of them. This is around line 370, and I think there's part of him that kind of knows her reputation as a god, her position within the kind of hierarchy of gods. I don't think he's fighting to kill her. I think he's fighting to scare her off in a way, because he knows that she's cowardice.
Yeah, that certainly could be. I guess it's just, I guess it would be interesting for someone who's interested in glory in battle to attempt to kill a god, and, like, maybe that opportunity presenting itself would be, like, you know, kind of interesting. I don't know. Stabbing someone in the wrist, as I said, is feels like a very specific spot. And I don't know if there's any significance to it. but it seems odd because I don't think Diomedes stabs anyone else in the wrist. It's just Aphrodite.
And boy, does he ever stab her, and boy, does she not like it.
Yeah, she runs off. She actually runs off to Ares to get his team so that she can ride up to Olympus. And I can't remember, I think we talked about this in the last episode too, where I talked about how Ares is kind of, he's weird.
He doesn't
because he doesn't say anything. He doesn't say anything. When Athena gave him her proposition to stand off, he doesn't say anything. When Aphrodite goes to Ares for this ride up to Olympus, he doesn't say anything. He just gives it to her.
He's the strong, silent type,
I guess. But the thing about Ares is that he's a really emotional guy. He's like actually super wild and passionate. He acts on his emotions very strongly in a way that almost mirrors the kind of coldness that Athena has.
I mean, that makes sense to me for a god of war, and if you think about it, war is a time of inflamed passions, a time of strong emotions and feelings and anger and, all of these inflammatory kind of things that I think of when I think of war. So it makes sense to me, but
yeah, I
think it's also a matter of like actions speak louder than words. And perhaps Ares is a proponent of that, he would rather let his actions speak than his words. He doesn't need to talk to show everyone how dope he is, because, man, Ares is cool.
Ares is cool, although, I actually don't know what the real Star Trek reference is. I think this is in the Picard era, where there's that warrior guy who keeps getting his ass kicked, even though he's supposed to be a cool warrior type. You know who I'm talking about?
Oh. No, I'm sure if we could get into more description here, that I would. But let's.
It's. Yeah, I only know it as a meme or as like a character type where like you have a badass character who keeps getting their ass kicked to show how strong someone else is, and that's kind of the role that Ares takes. He gets his ass kicked a lot. He doesn't win really.
Yeah, but
even though he's the god of war.
I can take it. This is fine.
I guess so. We'll see a little bit more of Ares later in the book. I guess to go back to this thread of the story, which is already sort of flapping in the wind in our careless grip. Aphrodite, as you said, returns to mom. Dione, something like that. This is the only time.
I think it's Dione.
This is the only time I've seen Dione, and I know nothing about her. I don't think she's, and I guess I don't know why they'd introduce her, because you're supposed to know who these characters are. But this is her one appearance. Aphrodite goes back up to Olympus. She cries to Zeus. Athena makes fun of her, which I guess supports the.
Everyone makes fun of her.
Yeah, well, I think Athena's the first. She's quite ready with her insults, which supports the theory that this is very much a focused, intended slight on Aphrodite by Athena. Zeus doesn't so much make fun of her as he says, like, this is kind of out of your league, dude. Like, you're not a warrior.
I mean, in kind of typical fashion for this era and these books and stories, Zeus kind of says to Aphrodite, like, you're a woman, go off and do woman things. You are the one who is like, go deal with love and beautiful people and stuff, and not this. This is not your arena. Leave it to Athena, leave it to Ares. They're like actually good with this kind of stuff. This isn't for you. Why are you here?
And her mom kind of tries to give her comfort as well, talking about how, you're not the only god who has had to deal with, pain and suffering. Everyone's had to deal with these terrible torments before.
I actually wrote in the margins of my book, like, there, kiddo, you're not the only one who's been stabbed. So many people have been stabbed. You're just joining the ranks now.
There are kids starving in Africa. You're fine.
I mean, for all intents and purposes, that's kind of what it is. Like,
yeah, she just got stabbed in the wrist. It's like, yeah, it's a quick fix up. They heal her and the pain goes away, and it's all like it's all solved.
Yeah.
And that's sort of that little scene, and then we cut back from there, which is it's a nice little reprieve from all the violence. I think Iliad does a pretty good job of pacing out the violence and the drama. We'll get some long segments of action followed by exchanges, dialogue, character development, or just other stuff that happens.
Yeah.
And we come down, and Diomedes spots Apollo. I can't remember if he spots him lifting up Aeneas or if he spots him afterward. But Diomedes goes for him.
I have it right in front of me. It says he loosing his war cry, he charges Aeneas, but what he sees is Lord Apollo himself.
Yes, he's
kind
blocking
of like,
his way.
Yeah, Lord Apollo is acting as a meat shield for Aeneas, basically, and guarding him so that he can't be killed.
And it says, I believe, that Diomedes charges him it charges him 3 times, and he's beaten back, but he keeps going. And eventually Apollo is like, dude, chill out. I'm a god. You're not meant to be able to kill me.
Stop. I'm trying to guard this guy here. And if you actually want to fight, you'll lose.
Yeah, it's kind of like the response that Aphrodite gave to Helen when she snapped at her, only much more, in the midst of great action and physical peril as opposed to emotional or what have you. And Diomedes, I guess he gets the message, he backs down, and this still makes quite an impression on Apollo, where Apollo goes to Ares, is like, dude, this guy's crazy. You have to get in there and stop him.
Yeah, and then Ares does basically exactly that and kind of joins the fray. And
he doesn't say anything there either, does he?
No, he never says anything. he never says anything.
Which makes his lines at the end of the book weird, almost, that he's talking.
And I think what it is like, when he does talk, you know that he has something very important to say. You know that there's going to be something impactful coming out of his mouth. So I think the fact that he talks so little in other portions of these books makes what he has to say, when he does say it, something that, it's the kind of thing where, in a movie, it would be the moment where everyone turns around and looks at the person who has been silent the entire time. And they're like, he's talking?
Silent Bob isn't silent all the time.
Exactly. It's very much a Silent Bob moment.
Ares is Silent Bob. Awesome.
But I just have this image of, in this portion of the book, of Ares almost being kind of like an orchestra conductor. Just waving people around, you go over here and kill people. You go over here and kill people. You do this. And kind of conducting this symphony of violence.
Maybe. I'm not sure what his role is in battle when he's distant from it. Also, as a peek behind the scenes, Dr. Daniel said something about how us comparing the Menelaus Agamemnon, it's just a flesh wound scene, to Monty Python was he thanked us and wished that he'd never heard it before, because now that's all that's in his mind. So hopefully comparing more of these moments to pop culture will enrich his understanding of the Iliad, and he'll be able to, but by the time it's done, he won't be able to read it as anything but a hodgepodge of cultural media references.
It will continue to happen.
Yes. Ares, he gets in there. I guess off the back of what we're talking about, him not talking, he does actually talk. He takes the form of Acamas, a Thracian dude. I don't know anything else about Acamas, but he basically whips people into a frenzy. And as he's doing this, Sarpedon, whom I believe I mentioned in one of the it had to have been in one of the previous episodes because it wasn't any future episodes because those haven't been recorded yet.
An astute observation, if ever you've
Absolutely.
made one.
Deep analysis. Smart thinking. Sarpedon, who is
Zeus's son.
Zeus's son, I think he's also Thracian. He goads Hector, who is, as of now, not fighting, for one reason or another. He's like you thought that you'd have all your brothers and your sister's husbands fighting alongside you, but they're not here, and you're just letting us, I think, meaning the Thracians, do the fighting.
Actually, it's the Lycians.
Oh, it's the Lycians. Okay, sorry.
Which,
so
it
he's
all,
Lycian.
At least for me, this all tends to blur together. There's Thracians, there's Lycians, there's Trojans. There's a lot of Ns. There's a lot of people.
I can keep them straight in my head. It's just I didn't do this one.
That makes one of us.
I can keep them straight in my head except when I don't. But yeah, Hector gets into the fray, and there isn't really much more to say here. Hector gets his sort of time. I read this as another little aside. What's important is that Ares is fighting alongside Hector now. They are fighting sort of back to back. And when we cut back to Diomedes, after watching Hector, slaughter a whole bunch of dudes, Diomedes, he spots Ares, and he says, "Oh shit, that's Ares. We can't mess with that, and we need to back down." He calls it out, basically. He's like, "Hey, Ares is right there fighting alongside Hector. We have to run. We have to retreat." And they do, and the Trojans make a little bit of a push. Hera notices this.
Yeah, actually, so I want to cut in here because I think
go for it.
There's something about the wording of this passage, because as we sit here, I'm always looking through the book, because as we talk about these things together, I'm always finding new things as I'm looking at it. So the wording of that little portion, he says, "What fools we were to marvel at wondrous Hector. What a spearman," we said. "What a daring fighter. But a god goes with him always." So it's not just that he shrinks back. He also is thinking to himself, "Oh, we all thought Hector was so impressive." But it's not just that he's impressive. It's because Ares is with him. It's another kind of point where these people are noticing that, this is not just mortality. This is direct aid from the gods.
And I'm unsure if this is meant as an insult, because if it is, it's poorly timed, because Diomedes is very much powered up by Athena, but I guess he doesn't feel like he has the chops to deal with Ares there, or Ares and Hector, I don't know, and he runs off. And Hera and Athena notice that Ares is sort of now running rampant. No one's stopping him, because he's Ares, the god of war. And so Hera and Athena decide that, okay, we have to do something about this. And it's a weird passage. I can't remember exactly where this begins. It's around line 800 or so, where Hera tells Athena, "Hey, we have to do something about this." But then there's almost an entire page where they're getting ready to go to Zeus. They're putting on robes, and they're climbing into cars, and they're flying up to Olympus. I don't know why they didn't just cut to Hera and Athena being there.
Something I notice is that these books tend to have a lot of kind of gearing up scenes. It's almost as if it wants you to kind of get excited while they're putting all this gear on. It doesn't necessarily have that effect for me personally. This was kind of a part where my eyes glazed over a little bit, and I'm just why are you telling me this? What is with the robes? What is with the cars and the fields? What's going on here? Why do I have to know this?
Homer, you need an editor. Cut that. This has been good so far, but cut that part. Just cut it and jump directly to the action.
Give us the action.
Where Hera and Athena appeal to Zeus to allow them to stop Ares, and Zeus gives them his blessing, and Athena goes down. And this is, I think, a really interesting part for Diomedes. This is where I think, if you're paying attention, the things that Diomedes says aren't quite lining up. Athena goes to Diomedes, who is, as I said, is shrunk back. He has made the retreat, and she accuses him of cowardice, which is calling back a little bit to when Diomedes said, cowardice is not in my nature. But she levels this at Diomedes and sort of gives him the sort of, I guess, pep talk that Agamemnon gave him earlier. Sort of like, you better go. Like, why are you shrinking and cowering? And she also compares him. She compares him as well to his father, I believe. She talks about how short Tydeus was, but Diomedes is no bigger or something like that.
The whole family here. Which is something that I kind of love about these books. It's like, not only do the gods come down and say like, oh, I'm gonna help you, I'm gonna defend you, but they also frequently roast these people while they're doing it. Like, they can't just come down and be like, I'll help you out, man. They have to come down and be like, look at what an awful coward you are. It's okay, I'll help you out. It's good. We're good.
Yeah, and so the reason Diomedes gives her is that she told him, hey, don't attack any gods aside from Aphrodite. This is why I'm shrinking back, because there's Ares, you see him? Which is true, but what's also true is that Diomedes didn't seem to really care about that when he was attacking Apollo. He wasn't like, Athena said, just attack Aphrodite, so I'm not going to attack Apollo. He went for him, and he went for him multiple times, went for him 3 times, and on the 4th charge, Apollo's like, hey, what are you doing? So he gives this reason, but it's not exactly true, because it doesn't seem like he really does care about this stipulation that Athena has given him. He's using this reason as a way of almost saving face, it seems. Or like, I didn't run because I was afraid. I ran because, well, you told me to, right? I mean...
Yeah, it's like, I fell because I meant to fall.
Yeah.
It's that kind of like when you do something really boneheaded and it's embarrassing and you get up and you go back to your friends and you're like, no, that was totally supposed to happen, and here's why.
Yeah, the thing is, though, I feel like you're supposed to run from Ares. I don't know if anyone would blame Diomedes for running from Ares.
I would. I personally would turn tail and absolutely run away from Ares.
Well, you're not a cool, powerful warrior like Diomedes.
How dare you? No,
well, I mean,
I am not a cool, powerful warrior like Diomedes.
I haven't seen you take an arrow to the shoulder yet.
Yeah,
so,
let me tell you, it would not go well.
Diomedes is saving face here. He's lying, or he's not exactly lying. He's sort of hiding behind something which is true to preserve something else that is true, which is that he has fled.
I feel like it's almost like he's veiling the truth in embellishment.
He's not embellishing anything. He's deflecting.
Yeah, okay.
He's deflecting from his decision.
Better way of putting it.
Or he's putting the decision on Athena. It's like, hey, you made this decision for me well before. I don't know why you're asking me why I ran. But yeah, as I said, I don't think that anyone should feel the level of shame, or at least what I read to be as shame from Diomedes, as to say, hey, I didn't run from the god of war because I was scared. Why would I be scared of the god of war? But that bravery that he declared earlier, I think that's something that he holds very dear to himself. And I imagine a lot of the warriors do as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, as we've talked about before, in these battles, there is glory to be won. There are literal prizes to be won, and there is a lot of pride. And as the saying goes, pride comes before the fall. So there's a lot to be gained, and there's a lot to be lost. What I'm saying is there's a lot to be gained. I'm not necessarily saying that he falls here, but the saying pride comes before the fall is like when you get too much in that zone of pride, should watch out.
You look silly.
You should watch out. And it applies to Diomedes here, and Athena kind of reminds him of that. And he kind of saves face about it.
After we have this little exchange, was probably one of the coolest parts in the entire Iliad. It's so funny. Athena is like, okay, like we're gonna get Ares. I'll drive, and she hops onto the chariot. She like throws Sthenelus out, very literally, like flings him out. I don't know what exactly that looks like. And what I really like is how it describes how heavy she is when she steps onto the chariot, onto the car. It describes it as like creaking under her weight. She's a heavy goddess, and like not heavy in terms of like.
No, but you can just imagine her as like being
she's like uranium,
completely jacked up and almost like lead filled.
Yeah, it's we'll get to talk about this a bit more in later books, but there's a real physicality, like a physical presence that the gods have in more than I think what Western, or at least what my kind of Western view of like deities or such folks are, which is a sort of ethereal, otherworldly, dimensionally adjacent beings, which are there and not there at the same time. She's really there, and she has weight, and the gods bleed. And
yeah, I think we get this idea that like the gods are just like flying to and from and up in Olympus doing their thing with their little god wings. And this is like, no, Athena is going to come into the room. Okay, this is where I'm going to go Lord of the Rings nerd. There's a scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf is kind of dressing down Bilbo. And as he does this, the room like creaks. This darkness comes around him and the room creaks. And I just get that kind of image of her, but in a different way of like, she would come into the room and you would hear the floorboards like creak under her weight in the same way that it's described that this chariot is doing that. And you can just like, when someone like huge comes into the room, and I'm like 5'2", so I would be like, but like when someone huge comes into the room and you can just like feel their physical weight, that is the image that I get of Athena from this passage.
Yeah. And I like that you pointed out that sometimes, sometimes they seem weightless, like when they fly up to Olympus or from Olympus, and sometimes they're like just inexorably present.
Yeah, and I think it gives a weight to the idea of them as gods, that they can almost kind of be anything and everything that they want to be. And it's almost kind of like they're engaging different modes of like, okay, I am now engaging heavy mode, in which I will scare the crap out of everyone. Or now I am engaging in, whisk away mode, where I am going to be kind of engaging in a more expedient type of activity. You get this feeling.
I guess I almost get the opposite feeling, where I feel like they're always like this. Whether they're down there with the mortals or if they're up in Olympus, they still have this fleshiness to them.
Interesting.
That's just sort of there. This is a few books away, but like when Zeus or when Hera is trying to seduce Zeus, she describes it as like trying to calm his seething brain.
Oh yeah, that's a great passage.
Not his mind, which is a little bit more ethereal, but his brain. Like he has
his
organs,
literal brain.
Right? It's organy, and so like that, it really solidifies how much, despite how different they are, how much like us these gods are.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I just think in my case, I keep coming back to the way that these gods are able to disguise themselves constantly. And, they can take the form of an old man or a young woman or like whatever, a messenger.
A kid.
I don't know if they do this. Do they ever take the guise of other gods?
I don't think so.
But I would imagine that would be something that might even be possible.
Sure, yeah.
But I just have this feeling of them as being like, I can be this, I can be that, I can kind of be whatever I want because I'm a god and you're not.
And I think either reading is like has much.
Yeah, I think both of our interpretations have merit to them.
In any case, that moment is really cool when she gets on the chariot, and
Absolutely.
The poet didn't have to talk about how heavy she is when she climbs on, but it does, and I think it's a really nice touch. And then they they go after Ares. They see him, and Athena puts on I guess like the Helm of Darkness or something. She's invisible.
Yeah. She dons the dark helmet of death, so not even
Yeah.
Stark Ares can see her now. Just basically like helmet of invisibility.
This is for anyone who's familiar with the video game Hades. I suspect this is the same helmet that the character Hades in Hades is wearing to go invisible. I suspect this is the same one. I don't know how it gets to him.
I think that's a fair bet. Honestly, I like that. It's headcanon now.
Yeah, Diomedes goes for or Ares. It's so full of great stuff. It describes Ares as like being on a kill, and I can't remember his name, but when he sees Diomedes coming for him and drops his kill, it describes this guy as like gigantic.
Periphas?
And maybe, yeah, Periphas, you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, drops gigantic Periphas. He's stripping his armor, which is weird because I don't know why a god would be stripping the armor of a mortal. Maybe it's so much. Maybe that's like a really important part of killing, but it gives him this sort of animalistic vibe. Like again, he's like on this kill, and he sees Diomedes, and he drops the kill, and he's ready to go for him. And Diomedes and Athena are going straight toward him. Diomedes, Ares throws. Oh, this is so cool. Like Ares throws a spear, but I think Athena just like flicks it away, right?
Yeah, she
like,
just boop,
like bops it away.
Sorry about it.
And then Diomedes stabs Ares, but Athena is also like it's a really cool mental image where they're both gripping this spear as it's being thrust into him, and Athena like pushes it through, and they pull it out, and Ares just unleashes this tremendous cry.
Can I read this line?
Yeah,
because
go for it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Let's see. There Diomedes aimed and stabbed. He gouged him down, his glistening flesh, and wrenched the spear back out. And the brazen god of war let loose a shriek, roaring, thundering, loud as 10,000 combat soldiers shriek, with Ares' fury when massive armies clash. A shudder swept all ranks, Trojans and Argives both, terror-struck by the shriek the god let loose. Ares, whose lust for slaughter never dies. Like, oh, the imagery.
Yeah,
the
it's so
rich
cool.
imagery. It is like, just imagine hearing this piercing shriek of anger and rage.
Yeah.
That everyone in both of these armies is just like, what the hell? And
It'd be terrifying.
They, like, yeah. It would be absolutely, like, horrifying.
And after this, Ares, he runs back up to Olympus, and he asks for Zeus to heal him up, and he also, I think he complains a little bit as well about Athena or something. I can't remember exactly what he says, but I do remember how Zeus goes about treating him, which
Zeus roasts the shit out of him.
He basically says, "You're my least favorite kid, and if you weren't my kid, then I wouldn't do anything to help you. But because you're my family, I guess I'll heal you up."
Honestly, like, he says along the lines of, like, if you weren't my kid, you would have died a long time ago. But because you are, I still hate you, but because you are, yeah, I suppose I'll let you be healed.
Which, again, off the back of, we've already mentioned Sarpedon, who's Zeus's son, and, we've had multiple people trying to save sons of their own, as specifically Aphrodite and Apollo trying to save Aeneas, who's Aphrodite's son. There is, like, the gods do seem to value the bond that is shared by family, even if they hate them.
He really doesn't like Ares, guys. He really, really doesn't like him.
Yeah, although it's difficult to tell if anyone actually likes Ares. We don't really get much.
I get the feeling that he doesn't have many friends.
Probably not. But, he's a violent guy. He's a very, as I said, he's almost like a wild animal. Like he's wild and he's impulsive. He's extremely impulsive.
Gritty. Gritty is one of the words that comes to mind for me.
And yeah, that's how the book ends. So as promised, this was extra long, but hopefully in our over the course of our conversation, we've justified the length, the amount of time that we've spent on this book. I think is really cool. If I were to give anyone one book of the Iliad to check out to like sell them on the Iliad itself, this might be one of the books that I end up picking.
I think this would probably be on my short list of books to kind of pull someone in as well. It's a great book, and there is a reason why we went on about it at great length.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess here we'll take a little break. We'll be right back with book 6, so stick around. Hello, dear listener. We hope you've enjoyed listening to the first part of this episode of Homer Bound. There's more to come afterward, but I'd like to take a moment on this break to say a few special thank yous. First, thank you for listening. This podcast has no sponsor. Everything is produced in-house, on our own time, and fueled by our own interests. Sharing in our interests means a great deal to us, and knowing that others enjoy the content means even more. Please follow us on our Twitter at Homer_bound for new episodes, or just keep an eye on the podcast page, wherever you happen to be listening. I'd like to give another special thank you to my friend Llama for hosting the show with me, and I'd like to thank the composer and performer of the music you've been hearing during the transitions, who has said he'd like to be known simply as Llama's father. Thank you, Llama's father. I'd also like to thank Bubbo for her contributions to the audio, Webs2D for some original art, and Total Love for additional art and graphic design, and Ghosty also for additional graphic design. Another special thank you to our numerous guests for lending us their time and expertise, and a last but not least thank you to Dr. Daniel, who anchors every one of our episodes with his insights on our discussions. We appreciate his time and energy, and we encourage you to stick around at the end of the episode to make sure you hear what he has to say. Please consider reading along with us as you listen. We are reading the Robert Fagles translation, and while reading the text isn't necessary for you to follow along, you'll likely get more out of the discussions if you have. Feel free to pause and return later if you wish to do so. Okay, thanks for sticking through our break. I'll give it back to me and Llama on Homer Bound. And we're back. Let's talk about book 6. I have stretched my water and refilled my legs, and hopefully Llama has done something similar.
Yeah, I got myself a fresh cup of tea. I'm ready to go.
Nice. It was nice to have a little break from that, as we've mentioned a few times, that very long segment on book 5. The book itself is very long. It's over 1,000 lines in the Fagles version. So
is it one of chunky. The longer books in the entirety of the poem? I think it is.
I believe so. It's definitely one of the longest. Book 23 is pretty long. Trying to shuffle through the lengths, but yeah, it's at least in the Fagles translation, there are not many that clear 1,000 lines, and this one I believe does, or it comes very close. But yeah, we've gone from the sort of heavy Diomedes-centric carnage to book 6. Hector returns to Troy. We don't jump out of the action instantly. There's still some fighting going on. There are a couple interesting things that happen. The first, and I don't know if this is significant or even necessarily worth mentioning, but I'll mention it anyway. We see Ajax, great Ajax, and he kills Acamas,
who we mentioned
who
in the previous chapter.
Yes, who we mentioned previously. He is the individual that Ares took the form of in order to like fire up the troops, and it's what he fought as. And I don't know if this. I suspect this means that when Ares was fighting in the previous book, in book 5, that he still had this form, and that Diomedes struck him down. And now Ajax is doing the same thing, only Acamas is not a god, he's a dude. And he does this as well.
And he dies most readily. As
it's
opposed to Ares,
straightforward.
who does not die.
No, he shrieks and runs up to Olympus and gets no moral support at all from his family. Yeah, if you want to, I guess, check, book 5, line 530 is where we sort of are identified what Ares, or who Ares has taken the form of. And I just thought it was interesting. I don't know if there's any significance.
No.
I know that.
But it's a little bit of a full circle moment, I think.
It could be. So one, and we'll get to talk about Ajax in the next book, book 7, where Hector duels with Ajax. But Ajax very famously does not have any gods on his side.
He's just
Athena
huge.
doesn't help him. He's just huge and strong, but he doesn't have the kind of divine assistance that someone like Odysseus or even Achilles has. He's just himself. And so it feels significant.
It does.
That
I mean,
Ajax has done this.
It seems like there's like themes of almost like patronage. When I think of how these gods kind of pair up with people in the books, it almost seems like they have patrons, and Ajax is just like, I did this all on my own.
Yeah, which is not to say I don't think that Ajax would snub a god's help.
No, but he's never had that opportunity.
He's never had that as kind of assistance, which I don't think it really comes up in the Iliad. It'll come up in the Odyssey, which we still have a long ways to go, but when we get there, we'll definitely have the opportunity to talk about it. So there's that. And there's also a brief little exchange between Menelaus and Agamemnon on the battlefield, where Menelaus, I can't remember the name of the fellow he strikes down, but this person...
Adrestus.
Who?
Adrestus, I believe.
Adrestus. And yeah, Menelaus, he bests him, and this guy basically begs for his life and says, I think he says like, oh, like my family will ransom me, we're rich. And Menelaus, like, his heart softens a little bit. Then Agamemnon shows up and is like, hey, you gotta be more ruthless. Like, just kill this guy. And Menelaus does.
Yeah, it's very, like, almost kind of shocking. The way that he just turns so completely as soon as Agamemnon comes up to him. It's like, whoa. What is this? What is this pity? What is this mercy? What are you doing? Kill this guy.
Agamemnon's relationship with Menelaus, I don't know much about it outside of the Iliad, of course. I know they're brothers. I know that Menelaus is king of Sparta. Agamemnon is king of... I actually can't remember what exactly he's king of. But Agamemnon, in a weird way, it seems like he's always looking out for Menelaus. My reading of this is that Agamemnon is older than Menelaus. That's how it seems, because he's actually quite protective of Menelaus. There are a couple instances where Menelaus would gladly do something which is dangerous, but Agamemnon says, no. He actually does this in the next book, book 7, where Hector challenges the champions of the Achaeans to duel instead and stop the fighting. And then there's in book 10 where I believe where there's supposed to be like a little scouting party, and Menelaus is like, "Oh, I'll go," and Agamemnon is like kind of tactfully trying to get him out of it.
Maybe this guy can do it instead. Maybe anyone else but you. Please, not you. Don't do this. Yeah, there's a very older brother kind of feeling to it. I'm not sure what their actual ages are, and but it makes sense, especially with the power dynamics in their life, with Agamemnon being the greater, figure of power within that relationship.
Yeah, at the very least, if not by age, then certainly by well, I mean, I guess Agamemnon inherited the throne of his father, so I guess he would be eldest. He would be eldest.
One would assume, given the way that things tended to work.
Yes. So I guess that's a fairly safe assumption to make. Yeah, it's a little exchange. There's nothing terribly momentous about it. It's just it reiterates what it's going to keep reiterating, which is that Agamemnon is quite protective of his brother, and somewhat ironically, think, though, Agamemnon doesn't make it home.
I also think that it speaks to like the heart of Menelaus, though, and that we've talked about this a little bit before, that he's kind of an emotional guy, and he has, you know, a sense of pity for this guy. He almost hands him back to be taken away to his own ships so that, you know, he won't die. Like, that is not something that you would really see in these battles, I don't think. It's more just like people get killed and then you strip their stuff off of them and you take it back to our ships. And Menelaus is one of the most important figures in these books, and here he is about to let this guy go who begged for mercy, you know, and this is another one of those places where he hugs his knees. He supplicates to him.
Yep.
And it affects him, but not enough that Agamemnon can't pull him back into kind of reality and say, like, what are you doing? You're supposed to kill him.
This isn't a place for compassion.
Like, this is not what we do on the battlefield. Kill him. Get it over with. He's not going home to his family.
Yes. Which will not be the only example of the battlefield sort of quashing what we might consider to be, I guess, positive traits. Whether or not this is like an exception for Menelaus or the rule, I have no idea. But yeah, it is an interesting little moment, and that happens, and it sort of passes, and then we sort of skip over it. That happens, we skip over that, and Hector receives a message from his brother Helenus to go back to Troy and to tell the women to make sacrifices to Athena. I can't remember precisely what the reason is that it has to be Hector, but it is nice for him to get back home. It's possible that this is like a narrative device where, you know, someone like the hero who has to go do something in this city or on this planet or whatever just so happens to have like family there, and so we get to have a nice scene with them while they're doing this other thing.
There doesn't really seem to be an explanation for it at the very least.
Yeah, Hector's just, he's fighting and then he's not. And then he's like, okay, I'm going to go back to Troy. I'm going to deliver this message. It's possible that it's because Hector's like one of the most well-liked, and so he might be able to more readily persuade his mother to like get all these sacrifices in order. I don't know.
It could entirely be because I think there is somewhat of a kind of golden child syndrome going on with Hector, where everyone loves Hector.
Well, yeah, he's the best of the Trojans. He's a noble Hector, strong. And then the last piece of point of interest before we actually get to the titular events of Hector returning to Troy, we have a weird exchange between Glaucus and Diomedes. They meet in no man's land. This is on line starts on line 138, where, you know, they're I think they're quite interested in killing each other, and then they tell stories about their families, their fathers, like where they came from, like who are you, like but if you must know, I am this person, and my and why, let me tell you a story about my father and how he housed these people, or something like that.
Yeah, and they kind of end up in a place where they're like, we could have been brothers. Interesting.
Yes.
Neat. Neat. Let's not kill each other after all.
And that's enough for them to say, you know, we'll still kill each other's allies, but let's not kill each other.
Right, you're all still gonna die, but like you're kind of cool. I don't really feel like killing you anymore.
Yeah, it's super weird. I don't think this is the only time this has happened. I think this is the only time this really happens when characters leave in peace. Although I guess this also kind of happens in book 7, which of course we'll get to next episode. But yeah, There's a lot of weird little things happening at the start of this book. Now that I'm thinking about it, where
it's a quirky book, and especially kind of in contrast to book 5, it's a quirky book. Book 5 has a pretty set path, whereas this book jumps around a little bit and dips into some strange ponds.
It's a little lighthearted as well, especially compared to the last one. Even in the battles, it feels more lighthearted.
And I think to some degree that could even be some of the purpose behind this, is to like give a breath of fresh air and a moment of levity and just less serious things going on after you've just had Ares like battle cry and make 2 armies collectively shit their pants.
Yes. And I think that's, that observation will carry throughout the rest of the Iliad, where, we'll have our ups and we'll have our downs.
Yeah, there are absolutely peaks and valleys.
There are some filler episodes, like the Iliad had filler episodes as well. So if you thought that was a modern day television thing, well, I mean, we've got at least one or two lying around in the Iliad. I don't think this is a filler episode. I actually really love this book, which for reasons we'll get to shortly. The last thing that I think is worth pointing out about the Glaucus and Diomedes exchange is that, well, at the end, they swap armor as a sign of friendship. And then the poet just says, oh, but Zeus took away Glaucus's wits because Glaucus exchanged his golden armor for bronze. And his golden armor is worth like 100 oxen, and Diomedes is only worth 9.
Yeah, he ends up giving him this gift, essentially.
Yeah.
And
unwittingly,
and just takes a bad deal. It's a bad deal.
He takes an L on this one. He leaves with his life, which is cool, but he also, he's not wearing his cool gold armor anymore. It's just an odd thing to throw in there, because I don't know what's supposed to say about Glaucus. I see him. He shows up a few times in the Iliad. It's not like, it doesn't seem as though Diomedes like tricked him, or did he? Was Diomedes the one who offered the trade, or who proposed the trade, or did Glaucus do that?
No, Diomedes is the one who proposes the trade, but Glaucus readily agrees to it. So it's not even like he's tricked. He's just like, that's a great idea. Okay.
Well, in a way he's tricked, because he didn't think about the value of his own armor. And I guess this is also this is a more civil version of what it looks like because when people are fighting and people die, their gear is stripped, taken as a prize. And they have this exchange where they're swapping their gear.
Yeah, this is just the not dying version of it.
Yes. But I feel like if Diomedes has any features of Athena, it is certainly quite possible that he has the cunning and guile to throw out this peace offering.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where he would stand to profit.
The wit is there.
It's possible, but the poem doesn't attribute this to him. It attributes it to Zeus taking away his wits. So I don't know. It's a funny little exchange. I don't know if it's supposed to be humorous. I don't know what the implications are, but it happens, and that is, I guess, the end of the pre-titular event asides, because we will cut to Hector, who is back in Troy, and he's delivering his message to, I believe, his mother, right?
It's a little appetizer. And now we are on to the main dish.
Yes. The main dish being Hector. Because we get a lot of characterization of Hector. He does a few interesting things. The least interesting of which is probably insulting Paris again when he sees him.
I found that very interesting, actually.
Oh, did you? Okay.
And I have a not weird perhaps, but I have a very specific love for like the amount of roasting that goes on in these
You
books.
have expressed this.
I love it. It's great. The level of insult is top notch.
I guess we can sort of skip a little bit over what happens when Hector delivers his message to his mother. Real quick. He says, hey, like have the women of Troy offer up sacrifices to Athena. We, of course, the readers know that Athena wants nothing to do with Troy, and the poem explicitly says Athena doesn't hear their prayers. She refuses to hear their prayers, despite them offering what seems to be pretty cool stuff. There's even a robe involved. I don't know how you involve
always
a robe
involved.
Is there?
I don't know.
I feel like this is the only instance where I feel like I remember a robe being involved, and how it's involved is a little bit unclear to me. Just that it's, a very nice one, and they make the sacrifice. Athena refuses to hear it, as we know she does, because she doesn't love anyone in Troy. She loves the Achaeans. She loves Odysseus and Diomedes. And then this is when, after that, Hector meets with Helen in Paris. And the reason why I say it's a little bit less interesting is that we're kind of... There's some new stuff, which we've talked about a little bit earlier, off camera. But it's kind of a little echo of Book 3, where Hector insults Paris. Paris says, you criticize me fairly, but don't you worry. I am good to go. In fact, I was strapping on my gear right now.
And Helen just sits over there feeling like she regrets a lot of her, fate in life.
Yes. Helen reprises her self-pity here quite aggressively, using very strong negative language. I'm curious as to what the Greek looks like or means when she calls herself these names.
Yeah, and this is something we'll also probably get into when we get to the Odyssey as well, because I know Emily Wilson has made a point of saying that a lot of the translators of these works kind of inflect certain words onto passages where they don't necessarily exist. People are called whores and bitches and whatever when the Greek does not necessarily reflect that language. It often says, a woman person or something along those lines. And in the context of it, sure, it may sound like that to the translator, but they don't necessarily have to use that language. And so here we get, bitch that I am, vicious, scheming, and stuff of that nature. Like, I wonder how much it actually aligns.
At risk of poorly remembering and reporting what you just talked about, which is like how these are rendered in Emily Wilson's introduction, I remember reading the part where it talks about like a dog nature or like a dog-headedness or dog-hearted or something like that, which, if I remember correctly, means something that's like you're not thinking, or you're thinking with a more animalistic kind of, you're giving into base desires as opposed to thinking with your sharp human mind. But I'm not qualified to talk about that, and as I said, it's been a little while since I've read that introduction. But as you said, we'll encounter this once we dive into the Odyssey, into Dr. Emily Wilson's Odyssey. And there was another really interesting passage with Helen as well, where she's talking to Hector that you pointed out, I believe, right?
Yeah, okay, so this part I love. I wish I had been the wife of a better man, someone alive to outrage, the withering scorn of men. This one has no steadiness in his spirit, not now. He never will, and he's going to reap the fruits of it, I swear. I love this little passage, because essentially what she's saying
that was
here
Helen
is
to Hector,
like,
right?
I believe so, yeah. And she's basically saying to him, like, I hate how this guy is going to continue to fail upwards. That's what I take from it, at least.
Desiring someone who's alive to scorn is quite interesting also, especially in sort of a modern day, like thinking about how we view, I guess, public shame.
Yeah.
It's complicated, because someone who sticks to their guns is usually celebrated, like someone who will sort of shrug off public opinion.
Right, but someone who is
and stand by,
clearly doing so when they are quite obviously very wrong, does not necessarily encounter that same embrace, of the people overall. And this is kind of what she's saying here, is like, he just doesn't care about any of it.
Which is good for him, because I'm sure that he feels all right. It's just that everyone else, hates him.
They do not like him. We cannot emphasize enough how little people like Paris.
I hate him like Black Death. But yeah, after this little exchange between Hector and Helen and Paris, Paris is gearing up to join the battle once again. Hector tells him to get a head start, and he'll meet him at the bottom of the city. But Hector has to do something first. He has to meet with his wife, Andromache, and his infant son, whom he calls, I believe, Scamandrus or something like that, because he was born by the river. I prefer the name Astyanax because that name sounds awesome.
It's just a cool name, Astyanax.
It also has a specific meaning. I don't know if we're given like the specific meaning, but the text says that the people of Troy call him Astyanax because his father is their one hope.
I actually have it right in front of me. It says Hector would always call the boy Scamandrius. Townsmen called him Astyanax, lord of the city, since Hector was the lone defense of Troy.
That's a lot of weight to put on a baby's shoulders.
Right. This is a powerful baby.
When we were talking earlier, I mentioned, we have all these powerful characters like Diomedes. Diomedes is such a chatty name, right? It's like, it sounds like the name of like the captain of the football team in high school or something, like Diomedes. It has that kind of vibe to it. And like Hector is such a cool name, and Ajax is a great name, and Agamemnon is super cool. But when we think of them, we think of these grown ass men who are like strong.
Astyanax sounds like,
doesn't sound like a baby's name.
It does not sound like a baby's name at all. It sounds like a very grown name, and perhaps one that this baby may someday grow into. But it's a baby.
Despite the fact that, of course, all of these people had, or I imagine they had these names since infancy, and, there was a baby.
Yeah, this was the point that I brought up to you, because you said something along the lines of, like, that doesn't sound like a baby's name, and I was like, does any name sound like a baby's name? They have to grow up at some point, and then they have that name, but, like...
Perhaps it's just striking that there's an infant in the Iliad at all, which is quite striking, and that this infant possesses, like, the coolest name in the entire Iliad. It's like,
again,
almost feels wasted on him.
It's a great name. Astyanax.
But yeah, this is a really cool segment where Hector meets with his wife Andromache, and we've seen a couple relationships thus far, right? Like between Zeus and Hera, and Paris and Helen, and I guess a few smaller ones that aren't quite as pronounced.
Yeah, and most of these people don't seem to like each other all that much. And this is the section, I love this section because it's one of the most kind of like genuinely heartwarming relationships that you will see between any two people in these books. And the other one that I can think of is like, I think I'm genuinely heartwarmed by the relationship between Achilles and Patroclus. But aside from that,
interesting.
It's a genuinely pretty,
it's heartwarming and heartbreaking.
It is.
Their exchange.
Because you know that Hector's gonna die.
Well, but foregoing that, his wife basically pleads with him, hey, like, stay behind these walls. Like, don't go out. You don't need to do this. There's a really interesting passage. Yeah. It's on line 480.
Yes.
Andromache, pressing close beside him and weeping freely now, clung to his hand, urged him, called him, reckless one, my Hector, your own fiery courage will destroy you. Which sort of harkens back a little bit to what Paris said about his own gifts. Like, his gifts, it comes from the gods, and they're a part of him. And what are you going to do? And Andromache is kind of bemoaning sounds a little bit whiny. She's
lamenting.
She's grieving the same truth, that her husband has this bravery and this warrior's drive and courage, and she's right. And his fighter's spirit does, in many ways, doom Troy, because he pushes out. He keeps pushing and pushing, as we'll see in the upcoming books. She's sort of seeing this future based on his strengths, the gifts that the gods gave him, as Paris would put it. And she sees that Hector is in danger of, using these gifts in a way that will doom them in a similar way as Paris did for himself.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, it also kind of reminds me of something that we talked about in episode 1 when we were going through books 1 and 2 about Achilles being very aware of his fate and his conversations with his mother Thetis, and her talking about, doomed to die young as you are. It's just this overwhelming sense of fate and these qualities of these warriors that will come to pass with their death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and nobody knows what will happen if Hector dies.
Yeah, it's not exactly parallel because obviously they kind of have different storylines going on, but it just...
They don't have a direct line to the gods for prophecy.
Right, but it has that same kind of weight of feeling to it. And a similar sense of they know what's going to happen. And Andromache knows what's going to happen because she knows who her husband is. And she knows his, his powers, his, not powers so much as like who he is as a person. And she knows that will bring to him this really ugly fate that she would rather not see him go through because she's sitting there with his infant son.
Yeah, and conversely, Hector is quite optimistic because he's like, I hope my son will grow up to be as great as I am, or greater than I am. It's a very like heartwarming a moment. But yeah, I think you're pointing out something really important where she recognizes what will happen if he goes out. But Hector, conversely, he sees, prophetically or not, what will happen if he doesn't go out. He has to defend Troy. It's his duty as its one defender.
There's a great little passage around line 530. For in my heart and soul, I also know this well. The day will come when sacred Troy must die. Priam must die, and all his people with him. Priam, who hurls the strong ash spear. And he's saying, like, the fate of Troy weighs on me. I'm the next in line. It's me.
Yeah, and I guess to go back to these relationships that we spoke about, Hector's relationship with his wife is divided. On one hand, I imagine he would very much like to respect her wishes and remain in, but on the other hand, he's also married to Troy. It's his place, and he has these obligations in much in the same way a lot of these characters have, whether they're obligations by, I don't know, inheritance, like or rule, like Agamemnon, or Zeus even, who's sort of been granted the gift and the curse of being the mightiest of the gods. He also has to deal with all of the wonderful shenanigans of his family. Achilles, with his great power, with great power comes great responsibility, that sort of thing. Achilles is a little hounded by that as well, because even though he's not a king and he doesn't command 1,000 black ships, he's very strong and he can change the course of an entire battle of an entire war just by being there. Like, that's a lot of responsibility.
Or by not being there.
Yes. And so these relationships are constantly being strained. Like Zeus with his obligations and his head bowing promises, as well as what the other gods want. Agamemnon with his sort of personal desires, insecurities, what his judgment might say, versus his obligation to having assembled all these people and brought them to this place. And Hector feels that too. He has his family who wants him to stay there, and but he also can't.
Absolutely.
There's one more thing I'd like to talk about, which this is one of the reasons why this book is my favorite, which is Hector and his flashing helmet. We have not spoken specifically about epithets yet. Grad has mentioned it in one of his tags. Thank you, Grad. Just as a quick refresher, epithets, as best as I can tell anyway, are, well, for one thing, they serve a metric purpose. So, like Agamemnon, Lord of Men, makes that line longer. I imagine in the Greek it helps it fit the meter of the verse. but it also sort of describes, it can be attached to anything, like the hollow black ships, or the ships are always hollow and well made. The spears are always bronze tipped
Hera
or
is
sharp.
always white armed.
Yes, or white armed Helen. There's long suffering Odysseus, or the tactician Odysseus, swift footed.
That might be my favorite
Achilles.
epithet in the entirety.
Which one?
The tactician Odysseus. They say it so many times, and it cracks me up every time, because it's just like, I wonder where that might come in handy later.
Yes, yeah. And Hector's epithet, which, again, as best I can tell, is more than just, like, when you describe someone, and you use just, like, an adjective, like, oh, they're wearing gray. It's like, oh, they're wearing gray then. But that's not an immutable characteristic. Like, Achilles is always swift-footed, even when he's sitting.
Or, like, the swift runner.
Exactly. Agamemnon is Lord of Men, always. Odysseus is long-suffering, even when he's not suffering long at all. These things are characteristics that define them, that you can recognize as part of who they are. And Hector's is his flashing helmet. His helmet is always flashing. And interestingly, his helmet is always flashing regardless of whose helmet he's wearing, which implies very badassily that Hector makes the helmet flash.
Like, by virtue of his absolute awesomeness, this helmet is now shiny.
Yeah, by virtue of him wearing this helmet, it now flashes. It doesn't matter whose it is. And I think it's quite easy to, I guess, get desensitized to these epithets, or to view them as sort of like decoration or what have you. And a lot of the times, of course, they are. But what is really cool about this book is that Hector's flashing helmet is real. It's there. When he goes to hold his son freaks out because his helmet is flashing so brightly.
And everyone cracks up about it. I love that part. So everyone finds this hilarious, that this child is absolutely terrified of his father.
Yeah, and he takes it off, and what was I saying? Yeah, it's made real. It's not a metaphor. It's not like, oh, his helmet's flashing in the same way, like, oh, his eyes twinkled. Like when you read that line, is no one's eyes really twinkling. It's just like a metaphor. Like, no, his helmet is actually really flashing. And when he takes it off and sets it on the ground, I think that's really cool. I like that this aspect of this character is not just made real, but it is incorporated into this scene, and also sort of signals that Hector, not that Hector should take off the helmet, or that Hector should put it down and stop being Hector whose helmet flashes, but, you know, that's what his wife is asking him to do, is to put the stuff down.
It signals that there's another side of him. You know, there is constant reference to Hector a flash in arms, Hector the warrior, Hector the fighting man. But this is Hector the family man, who comes home and his son sees him and is like, ah! Freaked out completely. And everyone cracks up, and Hector's like, oh, let me take this off and show you this other side of me, and endear myself to my wife and child. And then also I'm going to go back in battle and die.
But in that instance, it's impossible for him to be Hector whose helmet is flashing.
Right.
Whose helmet flashes.
There's a dichotomy within this man of, you know, he's more than just his reputation as the great warrior and the lone defense of Troy.
Yeah, and I guess what also makes it sort of weird is that it's a conditional epithet, because his helmet can't be flashing if he's not wearing it, which is, as I said, like, the other epithets don't seem to have this conditional aspect about them. Right? You know, as I said, you know, Achilles is always swift-footed. Odysseus is always long-suffering, even when he's not suffering. I mean, I don't know, maybe you can when he has the helmet off, but for me, since it's made real in this moment, I feel like engaging with it as like a real physical property of Hector makes it special for me, and that's one of the reasons why I found this book particularly enjoyable.
Yeah, I think you're not wrong at all to feel that way, and when you put it that way, like, it does kind of make it special for me as well. I'm not sure that that's a point that I had really considered before, honestly.
So yeah, he has fun with his kid. He smooches his wife or something, and then he goes off to battle. And there's one more interesting thing that happens before the end of the book when he meets up with Paris. It's right at the bottom of the city. They're about to head out. And Paris is like, "Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so slow. You gave me a head start."
And this, friends, is the one time, the only time, maybe not the only time.
Well, don't say that, because I've been wrong about this sort of thing before.
I know, right? Which is why I just followed up with maybe not the only time. But it is certainly one time.
A change of tune.
Where Hector does not insult his brother.
Yes. In fact, he reassures him.
It gives him a little pat on the back, and it's like, you might suck, but you're really not that bad.
Well, it's a little bit stronger than that even. He says, like, you're a good soldier, like no one could insult your abilities or what have you. So what exactly does it say?
I have it in front of me if you'd like me to read it.
Go for it.
Impossible man. How could anyone fair and just underrate your work in battle? You're a good soldier, but you hang back of your own accord, refuse to fight, and that's why the heart inside me aches when I hear our Trojans heap contempt on you, the men who bear such struggles all for you. And he says, let's go fight. But that strikes me as like a really genuinely nice thing for Hector to say to his brother. I think there's part of it that's almost a little bit like a backhanded compliment, but it is a genuine compliment. He's saying, you're a good soldier, and I kind of like wish that you wouldn't hang back and be such a wimp sometimes, because people could actually see how good you are on the battlefield.
And he just got back seeing his wife and kids, so perhaps he's in better spirits and he's more ready to see Paris's the good parts of him, or
exactly.
His merits as opposed to his demerits.
And then he goes on to say, if Zeus will ever let us raise the wine bowl of freedom high in our halls. I just want to know what the wine bowl of freedom looks like, and I want to drink from it. That sounds awesome.
The wine bowl of freedom is probably whatever wine bowl you happen to raise when freedom has happened.
But, like, can it, in my head, be like a really cool, ornate wine bowl of freedom?
Yeah.
Okay,
I mean,
cool.
I imagine they have a lot of cool wine
They probably
bowls
do. They,
around.
in books to come, they will get into the nature of all of these, like, ornate urns and stuff that everyone always has that they're giving out as
bowls
prizes.
Are great.
I love
bowls, cups.
I love a good bowl. I love a good urn. I love... That wasn't... rude. Look, I'm allowed to like fancy dishware, okay?
Yeah, that's that wasn't what I was laughing about. Anyway, that is the end of book 6, and we got to spend a little bit less time on this one, so hopefully this hasn't gone too terribly long. Book 5 has so much in it. There's no way I could bring myself to condense it any further, and hopefully we've justified that. And yeah, in the next episode we'll go over books 7 and 8, and we'll pass it off to our resident expert, Dr. Daniel, who will give some of his own thoughts on what we talked about.
See you next time, folks.
See you afterward.
Hello everybody, my name is Daniel, otherwise known as Dr. Daniel or the Dancing Grad, and I'm here as the quote-unquote resident expert for Homeward Bound to offer some thoughts on Wriste and Llama's conversation about Iliad books 5 and 6 in my capacity as a professional classicist. I teach Latin, Greek, and ancient civilization at the college level, and I love the Iliad, I love the Odyssey, I love all things Homer, so I'm really excited to offer some thoughts on Wriste and Llama's excellent conversation. Let's start off with Book 5, and as I believe Llama pointed out, Book 5 appears to be the longest out of the 24 books in the Iliad. I did some math, I looked at the lengths of each of the books of the Iliad in the ancient Greek, and it does appear to be the case that Book 5 is the longest, clocking in at 909 lines. It is what I believe the kids would call a heckin' chunker. If we look at the top 5 books in terms of line length, we have 909 lines for book 5, where we focus on Diomedes. Next, in second place, is book 23, the Funeral Games of Patroclus, clocking in at 897 lines. Then comes book 2 in third place, the Catalogue of the Ships and Agamemnon's Dream at 877 lines. After that is book 16, the Aristeia of Patroclus. I'll talk more about that term aristeia in a second, at 867 lines. And then in fifth place, book 11, the Aristeia of Agamemnon at 848 lines. The thing we need to keep in mind, though, is that these book divisions, canonically 24 books of the Iliad, might not necessarily originate in ancient practice. It might actually be a result of the manuscript tradition. So we shouldn't necessarily draw a one-to-one correlation between the amount of lines in a book and the importance of the topics contained in that book. There are some very, very important scenes and very important characters that occupy shorter books of the Iliad at the length of only 400 or 500 lines. So that's your top 5, but we shouldn't necessarily draw any deeper conclusions than that. Book 5 focuses mostly on the martial exploits of the Greek warrior Diomedes as he helps the Greek army fight against the Trojans. And Wriste and Llama pointed out that Diomedes seems to be getting some special favor from the goddess of wisdom, Athena. And there was a question about whether there's some sort of special connection there. Why does Athena show her favor to Diomedes in particular? A really interesting point is if you look at the etymology of Diomedes' name, you can break it apart into 2 sections. The Dio part comes from actually the name for the king of the gods, Zeus. Not to get too language nerd on you, but the Dio part comes from the genitive singular of Zeus's name, Zeus Dios, so connected with Zeus. And then the Medes part comes from a word that basically means planning, craftiness, or counsel. So Diomedes literally means the planning or the craftiness of Zeus. So when we're talking about those mental processes there, it seems natural that the goddess of wisdom, of mental processes that lead you to make good choices, would naturally be drawn to a character like Diomedes. More generally speaking, Book 5 is our first example in the epic of what we would call an aristeia, A-R-I-S-T-E-I-A. And what an aristeia is a long section of the poem that focuses on the wartime exploits of one warrior in particular, in which that warrior is really excelling. Aristeia in ancient Greek literally means excellence, so it really shows a warrior at his prime, who's really earning his keep out there on the battlefield. Diomedes is the first one to experience an aristeia in the poem in Book 5, and there are at least 4 Greeks who experience an aristeia. Agamemnon himself will actually experience one in Book 11. We're going to see another aristeia as well with Patroclus in Book 16, but as we're going to see, Patroclus' aristeia actually leads directly to his death. And then the most famous example of an aristeia is going to come in Books 20 through 22, wherein Achilles, who's trying to avenge the death of Patroclus, goes on a murderous rampage. He experiences his own aristeia, the longest by far in the 24 books of the Iliad, stretching from books 20 through 22. So the aristeia is a really interesting set piece wherein we focus in on one character in particular, and we get to learn a lot about that character. So Diomedes first here in Book 5, Agamemnon in Book 11, Patroclus in Book 16, and then Achilles in books 20 through 22. And finally, a few smaller points about Book 5 before we move on to Book 6. Wriste and Llama point out how ironic it is, perhaps, that the god of war, Ares, who is on the side of the Trojans in Book 5, seems to get his butt kicked, in particular when Diomedes wounds Ares with the help of the gods. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that the comparison that I'd like to make here, and perhaps this is a pretty apt one, considering that the way that Wriste, Llama, and I all know each other is through watching speedruns or engaging in speedruns of the video game Hades. Not even top-tier speedrunners of a video game can create a world record with every run, right? So just because you're really well known for something doesn't mean that luck is always on your side or that you're always going to be completely on top of your form, particularly when Ares is up against other divine forces. So Athena, for example, giving help to Diomedes. So yeah, the god of war gets his butt kicked, but perhaps that's not too surprising because we can't all be 100% all the time. And the last point for Book 5, I believe it was Llama who pointed out that there seem to be a lot of gearing up scenes. For example, when Hera and Athena were dolling themselves up, getting ready to go entreat Zeus to interfere in the battle. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, this idea of having stock scenes wherein people gear up is actually a feature of oral epic poetry. Gearing up scenes are most notable when a warrior is getting ready to go out to the battlefield. They put on their greaves, and then they put on their chest plate, they put on their helmet, they pick up their spear, and then they're off. Having a store of stock scenes, like arming up scenes and speaking scenes and things like that, allow the bard to draw on a well of information and a well of set pieces that the bard can then use to stitch the story together, so that the bard doesn't have to extemporize everything in the story. Now on to Book 6, and at the very beginning we have this very curious scene between Glaucus and Diomedes, who are on opposite sides of the war, but they use their lineage as a reason to establish a truce and to exchange gifts with one another. It turns out that an ancestor of Glaucus, Bellerophon, was entertained in the home of the ancestor of Diomedes, Oineos. And without some cultural context, I agree with Wriste and Llama that this seems like a little bit of a throwaway episode. Why do we have this really weird episode of these warriors dropping their weapons on the battlefield and exchanging gifts? The cultural idea underpinning all of this, though, is an idea called xenia, Xenia, which derives from the ancient Greek xenos, which means guest or stranger, and xenia can basically be translated as something like guest friendship. Xenia is a cultural ideal wherein you take strangers to your home, into your home. You entertain them, you put them up for the night, you give them good food as a gesture of goodwill. And xenia is both sacrosanct and reciprocal. So it is sanctioned by the gods. If you do anything against xenia, then that portends very bad things for you. And the host has an obligation to the guest, as the guest has obligations to the host as well. Xenia also extends beyond the boundaries of individual relationships to entire households. So in the same way that Oineos and Bellerophon were bound by the tenets of xenia, so then are Glaucus and Diomedes. The Glaucus and Diomedes scene is a clear illustration of what happens when xenia goes right. The biggest example of what happens when xenia goes wrong is what underpins this entire story. Paris comes to Greece, enters the household of Menelaus, and steals his wife, Helen, a major breach of xenia, causing an entire war. So the purpose of the Glaucus and Diomedes scene isn't immediately apparent, but it seems to be a foil for what went wrong in the interaction between Paris and Menelaus, wherein Paris very much violated the tenets of xenia, of guest friendship. The next question regards what Helen is actually saying in the ancient Greek when she talks about herself to Hector. As Llama noted, the Fagles translation is something like, "Bitch that I am, vicious, scheming." Llama and Wriste are absolutely right to be skeptical of this translation, because, as we've discussed previously, translations are acts of interpretation, and often a translator can insert something into the text that they see or feel, but isn't necessarily there in the original source. This is a particularly pointed issue when we're talking about things like gender or slavery. For example, using derogatory terms for women or trying to whitewash slavery by calling people servants or maids or things like that. Here, however, Fagles is basically exactly on the nose. The Greek for this line is at Book 6, line 344, and the Greek reads as follows. Da eremeo kunos kakumekanu okruo esses. Quite literally, da'er, a term of direct address to Hector, which means brother-in-law. Da'er emeo, literally brother-in-law of me. So emeo points to the first person here, talking about Helen. Brother-in-law of me. And me is in the genitive case, as are the other words and the other nouns and adjectives in this line. Kunos kakomekanu okruo esses. Kunos comes from the noun kuon, which literally means dog. So in the same way that our English has a sense of bitch as a female dog as a derogatory term for women, that can often be the case with kunos in the ancient Greek as well. Often when a word like kuon is applied to a male character, it often implies some sort of cowardice on their part. But here, sort of a derogatory term for a woman herself, being used by a woman, here Helen. Kakomekanu, an adjective that gets broken apart into kakos, meaning evil, and mekanos, meaning contriving or planning or plotting. So evil plotting is what I believe Fagles created with vicious and scheming. And then the last adjective here, okruo esses, quite literally chilly or freezing, but in the sense of sort of like dread or terrible. So da eremeo kunos kakomekanu okruo esses, my brother-in-law of me, who is an evil scheming, chili dog, is quite literally what the Greek says here. So Fagles exactly on point. And the last point to bring up towards the end of the book, wherein Hector and Paris are talking about the wine bowl of freedom. The literal Greek here is kratera eleutheron. So quite literally, a wine bowl of freedom, a free wine bowl. If you want to have a sense of what this wine bowl would have looked like, it is called a krater, Krater, and you can feel free to Google image search what an ancient Greek krater would have looked like. A krater is basically a large wine bowl from which the mixed wine into which the sludgy wine that I talked about last episode and water would be poured in to mix it together in order to ladle it out into individual wine cups. So a krater was relatively big, and it could be pretty ornate in terms of how it was decorated on the outside. And one final overall thought about Book 6, which is definitely one of my favorites in the entire Iliad. This book gives us a chance to look behind the walls of Troy and see family dynamics and very effective scenes that really raise the stakes for what's going to happen later on in the poem. If Hector were just some nameless Trojan soldier who happens to be good at fighting, but basically that's all we see him, that's the only context in which we see him, then when he fights and interacts with the Greeks, then it's sort of like, well, okay, just another enemy. But we get to humanize Hector in this book. We see his wife, we see his child, we see his interactions with his own parents, and realize that he's a real flesh and blood human being that has relationships, that has emotions, that has a lot of stuff going on in his own life. And he's just doing what he thinks is right. He's fighting on behalf of his hometown against these Greek invaders who have come from the Greek mainland across the sea in order to assail the walls of Troy. Book 6 is absolutely vital for getting you to care about what happens for the rest of the poem, particularly at the very end, in Book 24, when Priam, the father of Hector, comes to Achilles' tent to ask for his son's body back. But in any case, that's my time. I'll see you on the next episode of Homeward Bound, and with that, I'll throw it back to Wriste and Llama.
Thank you once again, Dr. Daniel, for your time and insight. Always enjoy hearing what you have to say about our discussions, and thank you, dear listener, for tuning in. We hope you'll take the opportunity to read along with us, since there's plenty to love in these stories, and please keep an eye out for our follow-up episodes by following us on Twitter at Homer_bound, or wherever you happen to be listening to us now. We hope to see you in the next episode. See you then.